This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. The download recap is brought to you by Podscribe. You can find out more at podscribe.com. This week's stories include the advertising landscape Part 3, Driving to Action, top podcast advertisers for June 2025, Spotify wants fans to read like they listen as it hypes audiobooks, podcasts become a strategic IP play for Hollywood talent, and Maximum Effort and Gwyneth Paltrow help Astronomer address Coldplay kiss cam scandal. Let's get started. First up, the advertising landscape Part 3, Driving to Action. Sounds Profitable's latest segment of data from the advertising landscape, built from the largest public study of podcasts and advertising in the country with 5,005 American respondents age 18 plus, is now live. As the title suggests, Driving to Action focuses on how different ad-supported mediums drive actions with Podcast Prime consumers. As a quick refresher for this terminology from podcast landscape and advertising landscape, Podcast Primes are respondents to the overall survey who consume podcasts at a daily or near daily cadence. For example, Podcast Prime respondents were asked to choose which forms of media they had taken various actions with regarding ads over the past 6 months. Wrote down a promotional code, put podcasts with ads at the top spot with 33% of respondents. YouTube with ads comes in second place with 10%, and Instagram with 9%. 27% of Podcast Prime researched the brand after hearing ad-supported podcasts, followed by Instagram in second place with 13%. A quote from Tom Webster's webinar presentation of the data in which he was highlighting a slide showing 22% of Podcast Primes made an immediate purchase after hearing a podcast ad in the past 6 months. Quote, 22% say that a podcast ad prompted them to make an immediate purchase. Again, much higher here than the premium TV streaming services or Instagram and YouTube. These may be podcast primes, but they're not podcast exclusive. They're not podcast only. They are encountering ads on all of these other platforms, but as we saw in the first couple of studies, the podcast ad is much more notable for them. They're paying more attention to it. They're clocking it. They're registering it a little bit more precisely. End quote. Magellan AI's monthly chart of top movers and shakers and top overall spend by brands has been updated with June data. Sports remains a favorite investment for podcast advertisers, taking 11 of the 15 advertisers' top genre for spend. Disney, LinkedIn, and T-Mobile are all among the top 15 spenders last month and spending more than they spent in May. But the number one slot goes to Toyota with $5,710,000 and change in June. While more and more big brands are getting into podcast advertising, it's worth occasionally taking a step back to recognize just how far the industry has come with almost exclusive direct-to-consumer campaigns back in the early days to now where Toyota is dropping nearly $6 million for a month of podcast ads. A new ad campaign from Spotify is promoting the fact audiobooks are included in Spotify premium subscriptions using similar language to music discovery. The ads focus on social media-driven hits, such as viral popular books from the tastemakers of Book Talk, which are readers promoting books on TikTok, all the while using music-coded language. Quote, Stephen King just dropped a 14-hour banger, end quote, might be a wholly new sentence for the English language, all of which is to promote the idea of discovering and casually listening to books. A quote from Spotify Global Head of Creative Jeremy Worth, quote, we want to make discovering audiobooks on Spotify as natural and exciting as finding a new artist or track, helping fans connect with stories that speak the same depth and emotion they find in music. We want people to read like they listen, end quote. In effect, the goal is to encourage the same buffet-style approach as users have become accustomed to with individual songs on Spotify. While more people listening to audiobooks is an overall benefit for spoken word content in general, it does mean podcasts are looking at more competition for attention within one of the top podcast listening apps. Podcasting is no stranger to star-studded casts and producers piloting IP concepts before they commit to a full TV pilot or a movie deal. For example, Gimlet swung for the fences with a star-studded audio fiction limited series back in 2016 with Homecoming that had Oscar Isaac and David Schwimmer in it, if I remember correctly. But newer versions of these test-bed audio dramas are skewing even more Hollywood. Digit8 covers the growing trend of established actors like Gina Torres and Ty Burrell headlining audio fiction productions that serve dual purposes. A quote from writer Alexander Lee, quote, "As stars like Torres step into the podcasting space, they're tapping into a growing trend where actors are not just lending their voices, but controlling the content. This shift reflects a larger rethinking within the media industry about content ownership and revenue models as companies recognize podcasts as a new avenue for creator-driven IP and a potentially lucrative extension of traditional Hollywood fare, sometimes even offering the origins of an idea." End quote. To get back on track after the whole Coldplay situation, for those of you out in podcast land, I've linked to an explainer of said Coldplay situation in the newsletter. Data ops company Astronomer hired Ryan Reynolds' founded production company Maximum Effort to produce a satirical ad. The 60-second spot features Gwyneth Paltrow acting as a temporary spokesperson, answering frequently asked questions about Astronomer. Anytime an on-screen question gets close to mentioning Coldplay, Paltrow cuts it off with a smile and a genuine sales pitch for a service offered by Astronomer. It's a solid piece of satire poking fun at companies trying to move past embarrassing online moments, and it communicates the humanity of the situation. Astronomer, at the end of the day, is a company with over 300 employees, regardless of where they might be vis-a-vis a CEO right now. I argue the ad is a solid reminder that comedy is not inherently dangerous or unwelcome when dealing with negative PR situations. When you hire the right professionals and execute it confidently, it can even be a saving grace. Finally, it's time for my quick hits. These are articles from throughout the week that didn't quite make it into the top stories today, but I still argue are worth including in your weekend reading. So let me run through these real quick. First up, Jar Audio is no more. Hang on, it's not a negative story. With the company now rebranded to Jar Podcast Solutions. They also offer up a simple message to marketers during this new era for the company. Podcasts should perform. Acast has published their second quarter report, and as the headline says, North America is performing well. According to Chief Communications and Brand Officer Lizzie Pollitt's post on LinkedIn, this is the first time the U.S. has been the Acast largest single market, with net growth of sales at 27%. Starting this week, Google is piloting a machine learning program that will use YouTube watch history to decide if an account is over 18 years old. And if it decides not, it'll trigger parental safety measures for any Google services accessed by that account. Night Vale Presents, the podcast label containing everything from indie darlings like Dream Boy up to the legacy hit Welcome to Night Vale, has signed a multi-year podcast relationship with Realm, who will exclusively represent Night Vale Presents podcasts for ad sales, distribution, and live events. Crooked Media, the company behind progressive political podcasts like Pod Save America, is hosting a live event dubbed Crooked Con on November 6th and 7th in Washington, D.C. That was the download brought to you by Sounds Profitable. I know I went through a lot of today's stories fast, so be sure to check out the links I've provided for every article mentioned. You can find that in a link in your podcast listening app right now, or you can go to soundsprofitable.com and navigate over to the download section. I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, and Tom Webster. And as usual, I would like to extend a special thanks to you for sticking with me as I brought you the top stories you might have missed this past week. I'll see you Monday. Robot?
Download complete.